Do you need to be restored? That's the topic that we're going to address today on Flourish-Meant. I'm your host, Tina Yeager. And today I have this beautiful guest with me, Meshali Mitchell. And she is a portrait artist, a creative image builder, and a storyteller. And she's here to share from her heart and her experience and her testimony and all of the research that she's done, a beautiful story analogy and a wonderful process by which you can be restored. Make sure you listen to this entire broadcast so you can get all of the tools that you need to rebuild where you feel like your life might be crumbling. Welcome, Meshali. I am so delighted to have you on Flourish-Meant today.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be on, Tina. I love your ministry and your heart. We had such a good conversation even before we hit record. And I love and honor all that you're doing, and just so honored to be here.
Meshali, can you dive into why this topic of restoration resonates with who you are, where you've been, and where you would like to help guide other people to go?
Yeah. So I was on a podcast recently, Tina, and the host asked me, said, if you had to pick one word that kind of summed up your journey with the Lord, what would it be? And I told him, I said, it would be the title of my latest book, Restored. I was born and raised in a minister's home in South Arkansas and was born in the ways of the Lord and ministry in a great home, actually an evangelist child. And my dad has spoken all over the world and still speaking today. So raised in the ways of the Lord. But I tell people, even being in ministry, that doesn't exempt you from pain and brokenness. We're all born into this world and into brokenness, and it's the power of the gospel, and that Jesus came to make all things new and restore our lives and bring great healing. And he is our only hope. And so my passion now and what the Lord has called me to in my life is just to share my testimony of how the Lord has restored me and brought beauty from ashes, and want to share that hope with the rest of the world and all those that are listening and hurting.
Meshali, there has been a tragedy just a few days before we're recording this message today, and a lot of people are listening to you talk about this from the point of being already restored and thinking, what I'm looking at now is devastation, there's hopelessness, there is nothing to hope for. People are suffering tremendous loss and grief of their homes, of lives of children, of family members, of neighbors. An entire Christian camp was washed away in Texas, close to where you live, in fact. So can you talk to that person who's in that place of devastation and speak to where they are from where you are?
Sure. Yeah, so I tell people often that I wanted to end the book with a ... instead of a period, because a lot of the message of the book is that we are all being restored. We're all on the journey of restoration. We're on the journey of healing. If we all sat at a table, we could share tragedies and traumas and hardships of our lives because we're born into this broken world, unfortunately. But our hope is heaven. Our hope that has been promised is that we can have a period at the end of our story someday. And until then, as we're moving toward heaven, we will have tragedies. We'll experience traumas and heartbreaks. And our hope is that Jesus said that there is no death for those that are believers, that he is life and he is our promise. And so as believers, we cling to that, and we grieve with those that have hope, like Paul says in the New Testament. And so, my heart goes out so much to the people that have lost loved ones. It's an unimaginable tragedy that we're all witnessing. And sometimes it's best not to say too many words, but I'm praying right now and have been for those that have been so deeply impacted. And Jesus is our hope in this.
Have you ever faced, whether it's through the analogy, the true life experience of having a house that was just hopeless looking, where you didn't even know where to start, and there was just that overwhelm of, this is a disaster? Can you talk to somebody who's in that disaster space from your analogy of what it's like to completely rebuild, say, a farmhouse?
Yeah. So when I found this, came upon this 1886 farmhouse fixer-upper, and I tell people it was in bad shape. It was loved and cherished from a family in the 1800s. They kept it in their family. The story is the whole, way through the late 1800s into the 1900s, And then I was the first person outside of the family line to purchase this precious farmhouse. But over the years, the wear and tear had played a part in kind of the erosion of the house. And I was drawn to purchase this home and love it back to life. And I tell people often too, I wish I would have had the HGTV moment of purchasing the home and the overnight move that bus and everything overnight was fixed and there's a big red bow and it's restored. Everybody look, but that wasn't my story. I was drawn to buy the house and I came into it and room by room, piece by piece, I began to go into each room. And I began to gut each room and restore it and fill it with good things. And as I began to do that, the Lord began to speak to me about my own soul and my own heart and my own journey with Him and the process of restoration, the process of being sanctified and made whole and healed. There are a lot of people, like I told you earlier, Tina, I was raised Pentecostal. I was raised in the charismatic movement, and I consider myself, a charismatic Pentecostal and love that movement. But we focus a lot on big moments. I say that my journey has been full of big moments where the Lord has touched me and the Spirit has moved. And I've had those moments for sure. But alongside those, it's a both and. There have been things in my heart and life that have required a process. They've required a deep, rich commitment to the Lord and what He's doing in my life. And I believe it's that process that really brings the substance of our lives, the glory and the substance of who we become. And so physically, I've restored this home, and wrote a book about it, but it parallels very much, we call it a modern day parable, with what the Lord has done in and through my life in healing these rooms of my heart that I say the doors were locked in those rooms. I locked them up, threw away the key, and never wanted to deal with them. And the Lord has been so gracious to walk to those rooms with me and bring real healing and abundant life to my soul.
Where do you start when you have your whole house seems to be falling apart and you don't have the tools that it takes to get everything done and there isn't an overnight reveal? How do you even get started? Where do you go?
So in my case, I say start where you can. I wish I would have had, like I said, the HGTV overnight move that bus, but I followed the Lord in a day-to-day process. And for me, I went into the home and I began to gut each room, room by room, piece by piece as the Spirit led me. I began to surround myself with great community. I began to apply the Word of God to my life into each room. Instead of just hearing about the Word, I began to apply it and walk in it. And day by day, sometimes I had great days. Some days in my healing process, I was crawling, but the Lord met me each day as I partnered with Him, and He began to bring real healing and transformation.
So when you're overwhelmed, the first place to start is get a team.
Yeah, that's part of the blueprint of my story for sure. Is, and I share about this in the book. In my mid-20s, I had dealt with some pretty intense trauma as a child that I never dealt with, and pain does demand to be felt. And I was mid-20s as a believer, not walking an abundant life. I tell people I was bleeding out in my relationships. I had very negative cycles of thinking. I just could not seem to get victory. And when I laid my head on my pillow at night, I wasn't experiencing that John 10:10 life, that soul abundance that I knew Jesus had promised me. And one of the first steps in my journey was that I felt led, like I just shared. I prayed through and I felt led to see a great Christian counselor. That was one of the first steps in my journey. And the Lord linked me to such a gift in my life, a counselor. I share about her in the book too. Our first session, the Lord really led us, and I began to share and confess and speak out loud some of the things that I'd been through. And it was like a dam broke and the Spirit began to move. It was just deep waters, in the core of my being that really, really kickstarted a real healing process. I had tried to go around the trauma and the pain for so long and realized you can't bypass those things. You have to go through them, really deal with them and allow the Lord to work and move and the blood to cover those places. And that began my real healing work. And then soon after that, I began to really surround myself, like you said, with a team, with a great community that really knew me. I had worn a mask of perfectionism for so long and a mask of, performance, and was just doing that to survive. But the Lord wanted to free me from that too. And I began to surround myself with good, healthy community. and they began to speak into my life. And over time, healing came.
And we know that there are some things that, like when you're doing a house, you can get some volunteers to do and some handyman to do, but sometimes you need somebody who's a specialist to take care of it. You don't want your handyman who's not licensed doing the electricity, for example. So you may need to get somebody who knows what they're doing. What was one of the things that really was the most restorative thing that your counselor shared with you or showed you when you were in that space of pulling in the specialist to rewire your house?
So she told me one of our first sessions, and I share this story in the book because it was such a powerful moment for me. But I went in, and shared a bit of my story, some of the things I was carrying so deeply. And she very much, I tell a story in the book how I began to share these things from the deep places of my life. And I physically put my head down on the table. And I remember seeing tears drip down off the wooden desk onto my jeans. And I'd carried such shame for so long. I dealt with some things so privately and carried such shame. And I really expected, I wouldn't have said this, but I expected to look up. And I expected to be reprimanded, or I don't really know what I was expecting, but I just carried that deep shame. I think because of the narrative I had told myself for so long. And I remember looking up at her in that moment, and she treated me as Jesus would treat me. And I saw the love of God in her eyes. And she said, Meshali, the Lord is about to do a deep healing work in your life and in your journey. And she said, it's going to be a bit like heart surgery. She said, it's going to take time. It's going to take resources. It's going to take commitment. But she asked me, she said, are you ready? She said, you're going to know the truth, and the truth is about to set you free. And she said, are you ready for this journey? And I said, absolutely, I'm ready. And that desperation I was in at that time, Tina, was, that was a hard part of my life. But now in hindsight, it was actually a mercy. Desperation was a gift to me in that time because it led me to get help. It led me to get that desperation, led me to the true healing path and journey. And so that day was a pivotal moment in my life. And there have been so many moments like that with her. I still see her every once in a while. It's like changing your oil. I say I go in every once in a while just to do checkups and check-ins. And it's been such a gift. But that moment really the Lord used to kickstart my healing journey. And the Spirit did a supernatural work in me that day. And so I could share a lot of those, but I know we only have a very short time together.
I do want to get into more specifics in the second part of our conversation. But for now, I would love for you to share how people can connect with your story, with your parable, and with the beautiful photography that you do. Can you share some of those places where people can follow you and stay connected?
Absolutely. Thank you. So the book is available where all books are sold. We're trying to push people to Amazon. If you guys go on Amazon, you'll find it. It's on for a great sale right now. And then online platforms, my website is just meshali.co. So it's, I'll spell it for the listeners. It's meshali.co. And then all of the social media handles, Instagram, Facebook, it's just at Meshali. So Meshali.
I hope that all of you listening have hope to be restored in your own lives. And of course, I also hope that you will come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant.